When I finally got to meet my first grandchild, my daughter looked at me and said, "Mom, maybe it's better if you don't hold her. You smell old." Her words cut deeper than I ever thought possible. I raised her alone, worked 2 jobs, missed birthdays so she could have a future, and now I wasn't even allowed to touch her baby. I stood there in her living room, my arms empty, while she held my granddaughter just 5 feet away from me. 5 feet that felt like an ocean. I could see every tiny detail of that baby's face. The way her little mouth formed a perfect O when she yawned. The way her fingers curled and uncurled like she was reaching for something invisible. But I couldn't touch her, because I smelled old. My name is Margaret, and I'm 63 years old. If you'd told me 5 years ago that this would be my story, I would have laughed. Not because it seemed impossible, but because I'd spent my entire life building toward something different, something beautiful. A family that stayed together, that loved each other through anything. But life has a way of teaching you that the stories we write in our heads rarely match the ones we end up living. I never imagined my story would turn out this way. You see, I spent 30 years building a life for my daughter. 30 years of sacrifice that I never once regretted, because when you love someone, really love them, you don't count the cost. You just give, and keep giving until you have nothing left but the hope that it mattered. Her father left when she was 3 years old. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He packed a single suitcase, didn't even look at her playing with her blocks in the corner, and said, "I can't do this anymore, Margaret. I'm not cut out for family life." Just like that. 26 years old, alone with a toddler, and no idea how I was going to survive. But you know what? I did more than survive. I built something. From that moment on, it was just the 2 of us against the world. And the world wasn't kind. I worked the morning shift at the diner on 5th Street, the one with the cracked leather booths and the coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1975. I'd serve eggs and hash browns to truck drivers and businessmen, smile through their inappropriate comments, and pocket tips that sometimes added up to less than $10 for a 6-hour shift. Then I'd rush home, change clothes, kiss my daughter on the forehead while my neighbor Mrs. Chen watched her, and head to my evening shift cleaning offices downtown. I'd vacuum corporate hallways until midnight, empty trash cans, scrub toilets, and listen to my knees crack with every movement. I was 26 going on 50. My hands were always raw from cleaning chemicals, my back always aching, my eyes always tired. But I wore the same coat for 10 winters because she needed new shoes, new books, a chance at something better. That navy blue coat with the missing button on the left side, the one I'd found at a thrift store for $8. I wore it so long that the lining started to tear, and I'd stuff newspaper in the pockets to keep the wind out. People at the diner would sometimes say, "Margaret, don't you have another coat?" And I'd smile and say, "This one's my favorite. Can't get rid of it." What I didn't tell them was that every time I thought about buying a new coat, I'd remember my daughter needed something. New sneakers because hers had holes. A calculator for her math class. Money for a school trip she'd been dreaming about. And just like that, the coat would last another winter. I kept every photo of her in an album by my bedside. A big leather album I'd bought at a yard sale with those plastic sleeves that you could slide pictures into. Every night before I went to sleep, I'd flip through those pages. It became my ritual, my reminder of why I was doing all of this. Her first day of kindergarten, wearing that yellow dress I'd stayed up all night sewing. I wasn't good at sewing, not really, but I'd bought a pattern and some fabric and sat at our tiny kitchen table until 3 a.m, squinting under the dim light, pricking my fingers with the needle over and over. When she put it on that morning and twirled around, saying, "Mommy, I look like a princess," every pinprick was worth it. Her 8th birthday, when we couldn't afford a party, so I baked a cake from scratch and we had a celebration with just the 2 of us. She'd invited her whole class, but I couldn't afford it. I still remember the look on her face when she realized no one was coming, and how my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But I lit those candles, we sang happy birthday, and I made her laugh until she forgot to be sad. That's what mothers do. We turn our own pain into our children's joy. Her middle school science fair, where she won second place with a project about solar energy. She'd worked on it for months, and I'd helped her every night after my shifts, even though I barely understood what she was talking about. I'd hold the poster board steady while she glued, test her on her presentation, tell her she was going to change the world someday. And when she got that ribbon, she ran to me crying happy tears, and I thought, this is why. Her high school graduation, where she gave a speech as valedictorian and thanked me in front of everyone. I was sitting in the third row, wearing a dress I'd borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and when she said, "Mom, you're my hero. Everything I am is because you never gave up on us," I cried so hard I couldn't see. Parents around me were patting my shoulder, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was this overwhelming sense that I'd done it. I'd gotten her here, and she was going to be okay. I remember her laughter echoing through our small apartment, the kind of laughter that filled every corner and made even the peeling wallpaper seem beautiful. She'd wrap her arms around me at random moments and say, "Mom, you're my hero." Not when I did something special, just randomly. While I was making dinner or folding laundry or getting ready for work, she'd just hug me and say it like she needed me to know. Those memories were my treasures, the proof that all the sacrifice meant something. I'd collect them like precious stones, pull them out on the hardest days when my body ached and my bank account was empty and I wondered if I could keep going. I'd remember her hugs, her laughter, her "I love you, Mommy," whispered before bed, and I'd find the strength for one more day. And I had this dream, a simple one, but it filled my heart completely. I imagined the day I'd become a grandmother. I'd hold that tiny baby, rock them gently in my arms, sing the same lullabies I sang to my daughter. "You are my sunshine," off-key but full of love. I'd finally get to be present, really present, not rushing off to another shift. Not worrying about bills or how to make $5 stretch until payday. Just there, fully there, complete. I imagined baking cookies with my grandchildren, teaching them how to make the chocolate chip ones my mother taught me. I imagined reading them stories at bedtime, their little heads heavy on my shoulder. I imagined family dinners where 3 generations sat around a table, passing dishes and sharing stories and building new memories on top of the old ones. That's what family was supposed to be, wasn't it? This beautiful, unbreakable chain of love. When my daughter called to tell me she was pregnant, I cried tears of joy. Real, uncontrollable, ugly cry tears. I was at the diner when she called, and I had to excuse myself to the storage room so the customers wouldn't see me falling apart. I sat on a box of napkins and just sobbed with happiness. My boss, Rita, found me there and thought something terrible had happened. "Margaret, what's wrong?" she kept asking. And I laughed through my tears and said, "Nothing's wrong, everything's right. I'm going to be a grandmother." I thought my family's circle was complete. The hard years were behind us. Now came the good part, the part where we all got to be happy together. But as the months went by, something shifted. It was subtle at first, so subtle I told myself I was imagining it. The phone calls became shorter, less frequent. We used to talk every Sunday for at least an hour, sometimes 2. She'd tell me about her week, her husband, her job, everything. And I'd listen, asking questions, laughing at her stories, feeling connected to her life even though she lived across town in a neighborhood I could never afford. But during her pregnancy, those calls started to feel different. "Mom, I'm just so busy with the pregnancy," she'd say. Her voice sounded tired, distant. "We're taking prenatal classes, setting up the nursery, meeting with doulas. It's just a lot." I understood, or at least I tried to. Pregnancy is exhausting, overwhelming. Of course she was busy. When I offered to come to doctor appointments with her, like my mother had done for me, she'd say, "You don't need to come, Mom. We'll FaceTime you." Each time, I felt a small distance growing between us, like watching someone walk away in slow motion. Each step taking them further from you, But they're smiling and waving so you can't say anything, you can't call out, you can't admit that you're being left behind. I'd ask about the nursery, and she'd send me photos instead of inviting me over to see it. Beautiful photos of a room painted soft mint green with expensive furniture and decorations that probably cost more than I made in a month. "It's beautiful, honey," I'd text back. "I'd love to come see it in person." And she'd respond, "Soon, Mom, once we have everything set up." But soon never came. I offered to throw her a baby shower the way mothers are supposed to. I'd been saving money, thinking about it for months. I imagined hosting it at the community center, making finger sandwiches and punch, decorating with homemade banners. Nothing fancy, but full of love. When I suggested it, there was this long pause on the phone. Then she said, "Actually, Mom, my mother-in-law already offered, and she has more space and resources, but thank you." My heart sank, but I said, "Of course, honey, that makes sense." I wasn't invited to help plan it. I wasn't asked for input. I was just a guest, and not even a special one. I sat at a table in the back of her mother-in-law's enormous house, watching women I didn't know pass around gifts wrapped in designer paper, and I felt invisible. My friends would tell me, "Kids are different these days, Margaret. They have their own lives, their own ways of doing things." We'd meet for coffee at the diner, and I'd try to explain how I was feeling without sounding like I was complaining. Because I didn't want to complain. I wanted to be understanding, supportive, modern. Linda, who'd been a single mother too, would pat my hand and say, "They're not trying to hurt you. They live in a different world than we did. Everything's more complicated now." And I'd nod, wanting to believe her. And I'd defend her every time. When Joyce said, "Your daughter should be more grateful for everything you did for her," I'd immediately jump in. "She is grateful, she's just stressed. It's a big adjustment." When Nancy said, "If that were my daughter, I'd tell her exactly how I felt," I'd say, "That's not fair, she's doing her best. Being a first-time mother is scary." But late at night, alone in my apartment, I'd wonder if I'd done something wrong, if somehow I wasn't enough anymore. I'd lie in bed and replay every conversation, every interaction, looking for the moment things changed. Was it something I said? Something I did? Had I been too overbearing when she was younger? Not supportive enough? Was I embarrassing to her now? My shabby apartment, my second-hand furniture, my waitress job, were those things she wanted to hide from her new life? I'd look around my small living room, at the sagging couch I'd had for 15 years, at the coffee table with the wobbly leg I kept meaning to fix, at the walls that needed painting. This was the home where I'd raised her. Every inch of it held memories. But maybe now, compared to her beautiful house with its marble countertops and hardwood floors, this place looked sad to her. Maybe I looked sad to her. I thought maybe it was just hormones or stress. So I kept quiet, kept waiting, kept hopping. That's what I'm good at, hopping. Even when everything tells you to stop, you keep hopping because giving up on your child feels like giving up on yourself. I went to the craft store and bought soft yellow yarn. Gender neutral, perfect for any baby. I stood in the aisle for 20 minutes feeling every skein, checking the softness against my cheek. It had to be perfect, not scratchy, not rough, soft as a cloud. I bought the most expensive yarn they had, even though it made me wince at the register. $8 for a single skein, and I needed 6. $48 I didn't really have, but this was for my grandchild. I spent weeks crocheting a baby blanket, every stitch filled with love. I'd work on it every night after my shifts, my tired fingers moving slowly, methodically. Single crochet, double crochet, creating a pattern I'd found in a book at the library. When my hands cramped, I'd stretch them and keep going. When my eyes blurred from exhaustion, I'd blink and keep going. This blanket had to be perfect. I put so much into that blanket. Every hope, every dream, every prayer for my grandchild's future. I imagined wrapping the baby in it for the first time, tucking it around those tiny shoulders. I imagined it becoming worn and loved, carried everywhere, the way my daughter had carried her stuffed rabbit. I imagined my grandchild, years from now, saying, "Grandma made this for me before I was even born." I'd practice holding the tiny knitted socks I made, cradling them in my arms as if they were real, imagining the moment I'd finally hold my grandchild. I made 3 pairs, each one taking me hours because they were so small and delicate. Yellow, white, and mint green. I'd hold them against my chest, rock back and forth in my chair, and whisper things I'd say to the baby. "You are so loved. You are so wanted. Your grandma waited so long to meet you." My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, caught me doing this once. She'd knocked on my door to return a dish, and I didn't hear her at first. When I finally opened it, she looked at me with such pity that I wanted to die. "Margaret," she said softly, "are you okay?" And I forced a smile and said, "Just practicing, just getting ready." But we both knew it was more than that. It was desperation dressed up as preparation. Then the day came. 3 weeks after the baby was born. 3 weeks of seeing photos on social media, of watching my daughter's mother-in-law hold my granddaughter in picture after picture, of counting the days until I'd get my turn. She finally called and invited me over to meet the baby. "Can you come on Saturday, Mom? Around 2?" Her voice was flat, like she was inviting a distant relative, not her mother. I was so nervous I could barely sleep the night before. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, planning everything. What I'd wear, what I'd say, how I'd act. I didn't want to be too emotional and make her uncomfortable. I didn't want to be too eager and seem desperate. I just wanted to be enough. I pressed my best dress, the navy one with the small white flowers. I'd bought it at a consignment shop 2 years ago for a funeral, and I'd only worn it twice. It was the nicest thing I owned. I pressed it 3 times to get every wrinkle out. I showered, washed my hair twice, used the expensive shampoo I'd been saving. I put on perfume, just a little, the kind my daughter had given me for Christmas 3 years ago that I'd been rationing. I wrapped the handmade blanket in tissue paper, tying it with a white ribbon I'd saved from a birthday present. My hands shook as I tied the bow, redoing it 4 times until it looked perfect. I placed it carefully in a gift bag with more tissue paper, making sure it looked presentable. My hands shook as I knocked on her door. 3 gentle knocks, not too loud, not too soft. I stood there on her front porch, clutching that gift bag, and I could hear movement inside. Footsteps. Voices. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She opened the door, and for a second, just a second, I saw my little girl. My baby. The one who used to run to me when I came home from work. But then the moment passed, and she was someone else again. Someone polite. Someone distant. She greeted me with a smile, but it felt polite. Distant. Like I was a neighbor stopping by, not her mother meeting her grandchild for the first time. "Hi, Mom," she said, and kissed my cheek. A quick peck, barely making contact, not the warm hugs we used to share. "Come in." I stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. Everything was so clean, so perfect, so expensive. White carpets that looked like no one had ever walked on them. Glass coffee tables without a single smudge. Fresh flowers in crystal vases. This wasn't just a home, it was a showroom. And I was terrified to touch anything with my second-hand dress and my shabby gift bag. I saw the baby sleeping in a bassinet by the window. A beautiful white bassinet with gauzy curtains positioned perfectly to catch the afternoon light. And there she was, my granddaughter. She was perfect, absolutely perfect. Tiny fists curled against her chest, dark lashes resting on her cheeks like little fans. A button nose, lips slightly parted, breathing so softly I had to move closer just to see her chest rise and fall. My heart swelled so big I thought it might burst. Everything in my body pulled toward that baby. Every instinct I had screamed to pick her up, hold her, protect her. This was my granddaughter, my blood, part of me living on in this perfect little person. I reached out, ready to lift her into my arms, needing to feel her weight, her warmth. But my daughter stopped me. She actually physically put her hand on my arm, stopping me mid-reach. "Mom, maybe later, she's sleeping." Her voice was firm. Not mean, but not kind either. Just firm. I nodded, understanding. Bobbies need their rest. Never wake a sleeping baby, that's what they say. So I pulled my hand back and sat on the couch, clutching the gift bag in my lap, waiting, watching. Every minute felt like an hour. I sat there staring at that baby, memorizing every detail I could see from 6 feet away. The way her hair curled slightly at the edges, the tiny veins visible on her eyelids, the rise and fall of her chest. My daughter made tea. We made small talk. She told me about the birth, about labor, about the hospital. But it all felt rehearsed, like she was telling a story to someone she barely knew. She didn't ask me anything. Not how I was, not what I'd been up to, nothing. She just talked at me while I nodded and smiled and watched that baby sleep. 45 minutes passed, then an hour. The tea got cold. My legs got stiff from sitting so perfectly still, not wanting to seem restless or impatient. I was afraid if I moved wrong, if I said the wrong thing, she'd ask me to leave before I got to hold the baby. Finally, the baby woke. A small cry, then another. My daughter went to her, picked her up, soothed her. I watched her mother my child the way I'd mothered her, and I felt this strange mix of pride and jealousy. She was good at it, natural, but she was good at it without needing me. After she'd changed the diaper and fed the baby, I stood up. This was it. This was my moment. "Can I hold her now?" I asked softly, trying not to sound too desperate, even though desperate was exactly what I was. My daughter hesitated. It was only a second, maybe 2, but I felt it. The hesitation, the calculation. And in that pause, I felt something crack inside me, like ice breaking on a frozen pond. Then she said it. "Mom, please don't be offended, but you smell old. It's not good for the baby." For a moment, I didn't even breathe. The room spun slightly, or maybe that was just me. I heard the words, but my brain couldn't process them. Smell old? What did that even mean? I'd showered. I'd used perfume. I'd worn my best dress. What about me smelled old? The blanket slipped from my hands onto the floor. I watched it fall like it was happening to someone else, like I was floating above my body, watching this sad woman stand in her daughter's perfect living room, being told she wasn't good enough to touch her own grandchild. My smile faded like someone had turned off a light inside me. I felt my hands begin to tremble. So I clasped them together to hide it. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed up. All I could do was stand there, frozen, while her words echoed in my head. "You smell old. You smell old. You smell old." I tried to smile, to act like it was fine, like it didn't matter. "Oh," I said, and my voice sounded strange, far away. "Oh, I understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand at all. I picked up the blanket slowly, carefully, like it was made of glass. I folded it back into the gift bag, tucking the tissue paper around it. My hands were shaking so badly the ribbon came untied, but I didn't fix it. I just wanted to leave. I needed to leave before I started crying, before I fell apart completely. "This is for the baby," I said, handing her the gift bag. "I made it myself." She took it, barely looked at it. "Thanks, Mom, that's sweet." Sweet, like I was some acquaintance who'd brought a generic present, not her mother who'd poured weeks of love into every stitch. I kissed her on the forehead, my lips barely touching her skin. "Take care of yourself, honey," I whispered. I looked one last time at the baby I wasn't allowed to hold, memorizing her face because I didn't know when I'd see her again, and left. I don't remember the drive home. I don't remember if I hit red lights or green ones, if I used my turn signal, if I followed the speed limit. I was on autopilot, my body doing what it needed to do while my mind was somewhere else entirely, trapped in those words. "You smell old." But I remember sitting in my rocking chair, the one I used to rock my daughter in when she was a baby. I remember holding that unused baby blanket against my chest, the one I'd poured my heart into. I remember how it still smelled like the yarn, like hope, like all my dreams of what this day was supposed to be. And I remember finally letting myself cry. I cried like I haven't cried in years. Big, heaving sobs that hurt my chest and made my throat raw. I cried for the grandmother I'd never get to be. I cried for all those years I'd sacrificed, believing they'd build something that couldn't be broken. I cried for the little girl who used to call me her hero, who disappeared into this woman I barely recognized. Aging feels like becoming invisible. You give and give until suddenly you're too much, too old, too something. You're no longer needed the way you once were. You become the problem instead of the solution. The thing to be managed, to be tolerated, to be kept at arm's length. And the people you gave everything to, they don't even see it. They don't see you. They see someone old. Someone who smells wrong, looks wrong, doesn't fit into their perfect life. They see an obligation, not a blessing. A duty, not a joy. And you can't even be angry about it because you love them so much that their happiness matters more than your own heartbreak. I wanted to hate her. God, I wanted to call her and scream, to tell her exactly how much she'd hurt me, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But she was still my little girl. The one I'd rocked in this very chair. The one I'd sung to, sacrificed for, loved with every fiber of my being. And that made it hurt even more. So I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't reach out. I told myself I'd wait for her to come to me to realize what she'd done, to apologize. But weeks passed in silence. The phone never rang with her name on the screen. No texts, no photos of the baby, nothing. I'd stare at my phone sometimes, willing it to buzz. I'd even check to make sure the ringer was on, convinced I'd somehow missed her call. But I hadn't. She just wasn't calling. I'd become so easy to forget. Friends would ask about the baby, their faces bright with interest. "How's your granddaughter, Margaret? You must be spending so much time with her." And I'd smile, this tight, painful smile, and say, "She's beautiful." I never mentioned that I hadn't held her. I never mentioned being told I smelled old. I couldn't bear to say it out loud, to make it real by speaking it. The pity in their eyes when they eventually figured it out was almost worse than the rejection itself. Linda stopped asking after a while. She just pat my hand across the table and changed the subject. Nancy once said, "You deserve better than this, Margaret," and I almost started crying into my coffee. But slowly, something inside me began to shift. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was just exhaustion. But I couldn't keep sitting in my apartment, staring at my phone, waiting for a daughter who clearly didn't want me in her life. I had to do something, be something, or I was going to disappear completely. I started walking in the park every morning. At first, it was just something to do, somewhere to go that wasn't my empty apartment. But gradually, I began to notice things. Other people my age, sitting on benches, feeding the birds, reading books. They were living their lives, quietly existing, and they seemed okay. Not ecstatic, not overjoyed, but okay. And okay started to feel like an achievable goal. I'd see the same faces every day. An elderly man who always wore a fedora, sitting by the pond with a bag of breadcrumbs. A woman about my age who did Tai Chi near the fountain. A group of ladies who power walked together, laughing and gossiping. They all seemed to have found ways to exist without feeling invisible. One day, the Tai Chi woman smiled at me. "You should join," she called out. "It's good for the joints." And before I could overthink it, before I could find an excuse, I walked over and tried. My movements were clumsy, uncoordinated, nothing like her graceful flow. But she just smiled and adjusted my arms gently. "Just breathe," she said. "That's all there is to it, just breathe and move." Her name was Helen. She'd been widowed 5 years ago, had 2 sons who lived across the country and visited once a year if she was lucky. "You learn to build a life they're not in," she told me. Not because you stop loving them, but because you can't stop living. On my first day, a little boy named Marcus ran up to me, sticky hands and all, and grabbed my leg. "Hi," he shouted. "What's your name? Do you like dinosaurs? I like dinosaurs. Do you want to see my dinosaur?" He didn't wait for answers, just pulled me over to the toy bin and started showing me every single plastic dinosaur they owned, giving me detailed descriptions of each one. "This is a T-Rex. He's the king. This is a Triceratops. He has horns. This is a pterodactyl, but he's not actually a dinosaur. He's a flying reptile." I sat on that stained carpet, my old knees protesting, and listened to Marcus explain dinosaurs with the kind of passion and enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. And for the first time since that awful day in my daughter's living room, I felt something other than pain. I felt useful. They'd run up to me with sticky hands and bright smiles, climbing into my lap for story time. I'd read The Very Hungry Caterpillar and Good Night Moon, and Where the Wild Things Are over and over and over. The same books I'd read to my daughter 30 years ago, but this time the children actually wanted me there. They'd fight over who got to sit closest, who got to turn the pages, who got to hold my hand. They'd call me Miss Margaret and tell me I gave the best hugs. A little girl named Sophie told me I smelled like cookies. Another child, Emma, said I had a soft voice that made her feel sleepy in a good way. They made me feel needed again, loved again, not for what I could give them, but just for being there. I found little hearts that didn't care how I smelled. They only cared how I made them feel. There was this moment about 2 months into volunteering when a baby named Jackson was inconsolable. He'd been crying for 20 minutes and Susan was at her wit's end. "I don't know what's wrong," she said. "He's fed, he's changed, he's not sick. He just won't stop." "May I try?" I asked, and she handed him to me gratefully. I held Jackson against my chest, that warm, solid weight of a baby, and started humming. The same lullaby I'd hummed to my daughter all those years ago. "You are my sunshine." And slowly, gradually, his cries turned to whimpers, then to silence. He looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes, and then he smiled. This big, gummy, beautiful smile. Susan stared at me. "How did you do that?" I shrugged, but inside I was beaming. "Just practice," I said. "Lots of practice." But it was more than that. It was proof that I still had something to offer, that I wasn't too old, didn't smell too wrong, wasn't too much. I was exactly what this baby needed in that moment, and that meant everything. One afternoon, I was reading to a group of toddlers. We were on the carpet in the corner, surrounded by tiny chairs and scattered toys. I was reading The Giving Tree, which always made me emotional, but I read it anyway. 6 little faces stared up at me, completely absorbed. Marcus was on my left, Sophie on my right, and Emma was in my lap, her thumb in her mouth, fighting sleep. This was my favorite part of the day, when everything was calm and quiet, and I could just be present with them. No worries about bills or loneliness or daughters who didn't call. Just me and these kids and a story about a tree that gave everything. I looked up to turn the page and I saw her, my daughter standing in the doorway of the daycare, watching. Our eyes met, and for a moment neither of us moved. Time seemed to suspend itself. I couldn't read her expression. Surprise, confusion, something else. Then the children noticed her. They followed my gaze and saw a new face, and children being children, they immediately wanted to investigate. They jumped up, swarming toward her, asking questions all at once. "Who are you? Are you somebody's mommy? Do you want to read with us?" But Marcus stayed close to me, wrapping his arms around my legs protectively. "That's our grandma," he shouted with complete confidence, as if it were an indisputable fact. Sophie nodded vigorously. "Yeah, Miss Margaret is everybody's grandma." I saw my daughter's face change. The careful mask she'd been wearing cracked, just slightly. I saw something in her eyes, realization maybe, or guilt, or maybe just surprise at seeing her mother surrounded by children who clearly adored her, children who had no problem with how she smelled or how old she was. She walked over slowly, carefully, like she was approaching something fragile. The baby was in her arms, bigger now than the last time I'd seen her, more alert. My granddaughter looked around at all the noise and activity with wide, curious eyes. "Mom," my daughter started, then stopped. She looked at the children clustering around me, at Emma still in my lap refusing to let go, at the book in my hands. "You work here." "I volunteer," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. 3 days a week." She looked around the room, at the cheerful chaos, at the other children playing, at Susan, who was watching this interaction with curious interest from across the room. "You look happy," she said finally, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, sadness. I nodded, holding Emma a little closer. "I am, sweetheart, I really am." And it was true. I was happy. Not the happiness I'd imagined, not the happiness that came from Sunday dinners and family photos and being the grandmother I'd dreamed of being. But a different kind of happiness, one I'd built from scratch after everything fell apart. A happiness that was mine, that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or acceptance. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, the children getting restless. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. "Miss Margaret, can we finish the story?" "Of course, sweetie," I said, but I didn't move. I couldn't look away from my daughter, from this strange moment of seeing each other clearly for the first time in months. "I came to tour the daycare," my daughter said suddenly. I'm looking for childcare. I have to go back to work next month." She shifted the baby in her arms. "I called this morning and they said I could drop by this afternoon." Susan appeared at her elbow, professional and cheerful. "You must be the 2:00 tour. I'm Susan, the director. Let me show you around." She started to lead my daughter away, but then paused. "Though I should mention the best part of our program isn't the facilities or the curriculum. It's our people. Margaret here, she's been a godsend. The children absolutely adore her." My daughter looked back at me, and this time I could read her expression clearly. It was regret. Deep, painful regret. But Susan was already guiding her away, talking about nap schedules and meal plans and emergency procedures. I watched them go, then turned back to my small audience. "Okay, friends, where were we?" "The tree was giving the boy her branches," Marcus said excitedly. "That's right," I said, finding my place in the book, but my hands were shaking slightly and my voice wasn't quite steady. Emma noticed, looking up at me with concern. "Are you sad, Miss Margaret?" she asked in her tiny voice. I kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetheart, I'm not sad," and it was mostly true. The tour lasted about 30 minutes. I tried not to watch, tried to focus on the children, but I couldn't help tracking my daughter's movement around the room. She and Susan talked, looked at cribs, examined the playground through the window. And every few minutes, my daughter would glance over at me, watching me interact with the kids. When story time ended, the children scattered to different activities. Some went to the blocks, some to the play kitchen, some outside with another volunteer. I started cleaning up, putting books back on the shelf, straightening the carpet. "Margaret," Susan called out, "could you come here for a moment?" I walked over to where she and my daughter stood near the entrance. Up close, I could see my daughter had been crying. Her eyes were red, mascara slightly smudged no matter how much she'd tried to fix it. "I was just telling Mrs. Patterson that if she decides to enroll here, you often work in the infant room," Susan said. "Given your experience and your gentle touch with Bobbies, we've been having you help with the younger ones more." My daughter looked at me, really looked at me. "You work with the Bobbies." I help where I'm needed, I said softly. But yes, I've been spending more time with the infants lately. Susan's radio crackled and she excused herself, leaving us alone in the entryway. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Mom, my daughter started, then stopped. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't know you were doing this. You didn't ask, I said, and I didn't mean it cruelly, but it came out that way. A simple truth that hurt. She flinched. You're right, I didn't. She looked down at her baby, then back at me. I've been a terrible daughter. I wanted to disagree, to comfort her the way I always had, to tell her it was okay. But I couldn't. Not yet, because it wasn't okay. What you said to me that day, I began, my voice low, about how I smelled old. Do you know how that made me feel? She was crying openly now. I know, and I'm so sorry. Mom, I was trying to be this perfect mother, and my mother-in-law kept making comments about her methods versus yours, and I was so overwhelmed and tired, and she broke down completely. I said the cruelest thing I could think of to the person who loved me most, and I've regretted it every single day since. The baby started to fuss, reacting to her mother's distress. Without thinking, I reached out. May I? My daughter nodded, and carefully, so carefully, she placed my granddaughter in my arms. This was the moment I'd been dreaming of for months. The weight of her, the warmth, the baby smell of her skin. She was heavier than I expected, more solid. She looked up at me with her mother's eyes, my eyes, and made a small cooing sound. My heart, which I'd thought was too broken to feel anything new, swelled with love so intense it hurt. Hi, sweet girl, I whispered. I'm your grandma. I've been waiting so long to hold you. The baby reached up with one tiny hand and grabbed my finger, her grip surprisingly strong. She studied my face seriously, this solemn little expression, and then she smiled. Just like Jackson had smiled at me weeks ago, this big, beautiful smile that said I was exactly who she needed. I looked up at my daughter and we were both crying now. She's perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. She needs you, my daughter said. I need you. Mom, I've been so lost. My mother-in-law, she acts like she has all the answers, and she probably does, but she's not you. She didn't sing to me when I had nightmares. She didn't work 2 jobs so I could have a better life. She didn't make me who I am. She wiped her eyes. You did, and I threw that away because I was trying to fit into this life I thought I was supposed to want. I swayed gently, rocking my granddaughter, and felt something start to heal inside me. Not completely, not instantly. This kind of hurt doesn't disappear with one apology, but it was a beginning. I'm not saying it's okay, I said quietly. What you said, how you treated me, it broke something in me. I need you to know that. I do know, she whispered. Mom, I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I want to try to make this right, if you'll let me. The baby made a small sound and nestled against my chest, completely comfortable, completely trusting. This child didn't care that I was old, that I lived in a small apartment, that I worked as a waitress. She just knew I was safe, I was warm, I was love. She does need to get to know you, my daughter continued. And I was thinking maybe you could babysit sometimes. When I go back to work, I know you volunteer here, but maybe some evenings or weekends you could. She trailed off, uncertain. I looked at my granddaughter, then at my daughter. We'll take it slow, I said. I'm not trying to punish you, but I need time. I need to know this won't happen again, that you won't decide I'm not good enough the next time your mother-in-law makes a comment or you feel stressed. Never again, she said fiercely. Mom, never again, I swear. Susan came back, looking between us with a knowing smile. So, Mrs. Patterson, do you have any other questions about our program? My daughter shook her head. Actually, I think I've found a different arrangement. She looked at me. If that's okay. I didn't answer right away. I just looked down at my granddaughter, at this perfect little person who deserved better than a family torn apart by pride and thoughtless words. She deserved a grandmother who was present, who was strong enough to set boundaries, but loving enough to forgive. "We'll talk about it," I finally said. "Come by my apartment tomorrow, bring her. We'll have tea and talk properly." My daughter nodded eagerly. "Okay, yes, what time?" 2:00, I said. "I work the morning shift tomorrow." As I handed the baby back, my granddaughter whimpered, reaching for me. That small gesture, that tiny indication that she wanted me, meant more than my daughter could ever know. After they left, I stood in the doorway watching them load into the car. Susan came to stand beside me. "That's your daughter?" she asked. I nodded. "And your granddaughter?" "Yes." "Complicated," she said simply. "Very." She patted my shoulder. "For what it's worth, you're wonderful with all the children here, but I could see your face when you held that baby. That's different. That's yours." I went back to the children, finished out my shift, helped clean up the afternoon snack mess, and read 3 more books. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment of that conversation, feeling the phantom weight of my granddaughter in my arms. When I got home that evening, I sat in my rocking chair with that yellow blanket I'd crocheted, the one I'd brought home in shame and heartbreak months ago. I held it up to the light, examining every stitch. It was beautiful, imperfect in places where my tired hands had made mistakes, but beautiful nonetheless. I called Linda. "She came to the daycare today," I said. "Your daughter?" "Yes." And I held my grandbaby for the first time, really held her. Linda was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "Scared," I admitted. "Hopeful, angry still, but less angry than yesterday. It's all mixed up together." "That's normal," Linda said. "Healing isn't linear, Margaret. You're allowed to feel everything at once." The next day, I cleaned my apartment. Really cleaned it, not just the surface tidying I usually did. I vacuumed, dusted, scrubbed the bathroom, washed the windows. I wanted her to see that my home might be small, might be old, but it was clean. It was full of love. It was enough. At exactly 2:00, she knocked. I took a deep breath and opened the door. She looked nervous, shifting the baby carrier from one arm to the other. "Hi, Mom." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, looking around like she was seeing it for the first time. And maybe she was really seeing it. Not judging it against her house with its marble and hardwood, but seeing it for what it was. The place her mother lived. The place she'd grown up. "I forgot how much I loved this apartment," she said quietly. She walked to the bookshelf, touching the photo albums. "You still have all of these?" "Of course, they're my treasures." She pulled one out, opened it randomly. A photo of her at age 7, missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera. "I remember this day. We went to the park and you pushed me on the swings for hours." "Your favorite thing," I said, moving to stand beside her. "You'd scream, 'Higher, Mommy, higher,' until I thought my arms would fall off." She laughed, but it turned into a sob. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you as my mom and started seeing you as someone to be managed. Someone who didn't fit into my new life." I put my arm around her shoulders. "The day you got married, you moved into a different world. Your husband's family has money, status, things I could never give you. And I was happy for you, so happy. But somewhere along the way, you started to be ashamed of where you came from." "I was never ashamed of you," she protested, but we both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Maybe not ashamed," I said gently, "but maybe uncomfortable. Maybe worried about what your mother-in-law would think or your husband's friends. Maybe scared that having a mother who works at a diner somehow reflected badly on you." She closed the album, holding it against her chest. When I was pregnant, his mother kept talking about her experience, her expertise. She raised 4 children. She made it sound so easy, so perfect. And then she'd make these little comments. Of course I had help. I had a nanny, a night nurse, a housekeeper. I don't know how people do it without support. And I'd think about you, raising me alone, working constantly, never having help, and I felt. What? I prompted. Guilty, she whispered. Guilty that I had it so much easier than you did. And instead of being grateful, instead of appreciating you more, I pushed you away. Because looking at you reminded me that I was taking the easy path, that I wasn't as strong as you were. This was more honesty than we'd had in years. I led her to the couch, and we sat down. The baby was still sleeping in her carrier, oblivious to the emotional reckoning happening around her. I need you to understand something, I said. I don't regret any of it. The struggle, the sacrifice, the hard years. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat because you were worth it. You are worth it. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt when you made me feel like all of that wasn't enough, like I wasn't enough. You're more than enough, she said fiercely. Mom, you're everything. And I almost lost you because I was too stupid and selfish to see it. The baby stirred, making small waking up noises. My daughter unbuckled her and lifted her out. Here, she said, placing her in my arms without hesitation. She should know her grandma. I held my granddaughter, and this time there was no tension, no hesitation, no comments about how I smelled. Just a mother, a daughter, and a granddaughter in a small apartment filled with love and history and second chances. What's her name? I asked suddenly. You never actually told me her name. My daughter smiled, really smiled for the first time since arriving. Margaret. We named her Margaret Rose, after you. I started crying then, holding my namesake against my chest. You named her after me. Of course we did. I wanted to from the beginning. But then everything got so messed up, and I couldn't tell you because I'd ruined everything, and I thought you'd think I was just trying to manipulate you. She was crying too now, both of us sitting on my old couch with tears streaming down our faces, while baby Margaret looked back and forth between us with wide, confused eyes. Why Rose? I managed to ask. Because when I was little, you used to call me your little Rose. Do you remember? I did remember. She'd been obsessed with Beauty and the Beast, and I'd started calling her my Rose, my beauty. I remember, I said. I wanted her to have that connection. To you, to me, to all of us. I wanted her to have a name that meant something, that came from real love, not just because it sounded pretty. We sat there for a long time, passing the baby back and forth, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about the sleepless nights, the breastfeeding struggles, the overwhelming fear that she was doing everything wrong. I told her about my volunteering, about the children at the daycare, about how I'd built a life that had meaning even when I thought I'd lost everything. I want you to be part of her life, she said as the afternoon light started to fade. Really part of it, not just babysitting sometimes, but I want her to grow up knowing you the way I knew you. I want her to hear your stories, eat your cooking, learn from your strength. And your mother-in-law? I asked, because that elephant was still in the room. She sighed. She's been difficult. When I told her I wanted you more involved, she got upset, said I was making a mistake, that you didn't have the right experience, that her methods were proven. She looked at me, and I told her that you raised me alone with nothing, and I turned out pretty damn good. And if she had a problem with my mother, she had a problem with me. You stood up to her. I did. I should have done it months ago. Years ago, maybe. But better late than never, right? I smiled. Better late than never. As she was leaving, baby Margaret bundled up against the evening chill. My daughter turned back. Mom, thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for building something beautiful even when I made you feel worthless. Thank you for being stronger than I could ever be. "You're stronger than you think," I said. "You're my daughter. Strength is in your DNA." After she left, I sat in my rocking chair with that yellow blanket, and I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the rejection, the slow rebuilding, and now this fragile reconciliation. Nothing was fixed completely. Trust would take time to rebuild. There would be setbacks, difficult conversations, moments when old hurts surfaced. But we'd started. We'd taken the first steps. And sometimes that's all healing is, just showing up and taking the next small step, then the next, then the next. The weeks that followed were careful, gentle. She'd bring baby Margaret over twice a week. We'd have tea, talk, let the baby get comfortable with me. Sometimes her husband came too, and I could see him trying, really trying, to understand what had happened and how to support his wife's relationship with her mother. I went to their house for dinner one Sunday, and it was awkward. Her mother-in-law was there, cold and judgmental, making snide comments about different generational approaches to childcare. But my daughter shut it down. "Mom's approach created me," she said firmly. "I think that speaks for itself." I started babysitting one evening a week, then 2, then 3. I'd rock baby Margaret to sleep, sing her the same lullabies I'd sung to her mother, tell her stories about her mommy when she was little. "Your mommy was so brave," I'd whisper. Even when things were scary, even when we didn't have much, she never stopped believing things could get better. The baby would look up at me with those serious eyes, and I'd think about generational patterns, about cycles of pain and healing, about how we have the power to change the stories we're telling. I still volunteered at the daycare. Those children still needed me, and I needed them. But now I had both. My chosen family at sunny days, and my blood family slowly knitting itself back together. One day, about 6 months after that confrontation at the daycare, my daughter showed up at my apartment unannounced. She was carrying a large frame wrapped in brown paper. "I made you something," she said, almost shy. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a photo collage. Photos of me throughout her life, holding her as a baby, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding. And new photos, me holding baby Margaret at the daycare, me reading to the children, me and my daughter having tea in my apartment. In the center, in beautiful calligraphy, it said, "The strongest people are not those who show strength in front of us, but those who win battles we know nothing about." Thank you, Mom, for fighting for us even when we didn't deserve it. I cried, of course, held that frame and cried like I'd cried that day in my rocking chair, but these were different tears. These were healing tears. "I wanted you to see yourself the way I see you now," she said. "The way I should have always seen you, not as someone to be embarrassed about or managed or kept at arm's length, but as my hero, my real hero." We hung it in my living room, right above the rocking chair. And every time I sit there now, holding baby Margaret or just rocking in the silence, I look up at that frame and remember that some stories don't end the way we expect. Some stories break your heart before they heal it. Some stories teach you that love isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. Some stories remind you that your worth isn't determined by who accepts you, but by how you rebuild yourself when you're rejected. Maybe love doesn't always come from where we expect it. Sometimes, life closes one door only to show us another filled with laughter, smaller hands, and second chances. Sometimes the family we choose saves us while we're waiting for the family we birthed to remember why they needed us. She thought she lost her family, but she became one to many. And then, when she'd learned to stand on her own, when she'd found her own worth apart from being needed, her family came back. Not because she begged, not because she made herself smaller, but because she grew bigger. That's her legend. What's yours?